once again to discuss things.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentleman Holiday Month. I am Sid Part 2, joining me today is...
A geek for fun.
Indeed. Today we're discussing what?
We are discussing the Roman god Saturn, which could be seen as a strange choice, but the deeper you go into it, it also seemingly ties in quite well.
I mean, you're going to have to justify it, because I asked you, okay, what's his Greek counterpart? Because, of course, all the Roman gods are just Greek gods with name swaps. So I'm really not sure what Kronos has to do with the holidays.
Well, specifically closer to New Year's, but I feel it's still in that vibe, especially when you get into specifically the Romans put a much higher degree of emphasis on Saturn than the Greeks did with Kronos. So there are a lot of differences, specifically the major thing being the holiday that ran through the 17th of December to the 23rd of December, which was Saturnalia. And a lot of people trace this back to another kind of seeding of Christmas in people's cultures, to the fact that the reason why Christmas is at the 25th of December is because the Romans moved it so it would fit with this holiday. Which I think is pretty important to talk about.
That's fair. Yeah, you know, the church always has like these moving holidays and stuff, trying to in their attempts to what's the word I want? Evangelicize? Is that the right word?
I believe so, yeah.
Where you go, I don't know, is it evangelical? Where you go around and you're trying to convert people to your religion? Is that what that is?
Yeah.
Okay, my bad. It feels like there's another word that I'm missing. Anyway,
Colonize.
pretty much. No, I mean, that was something the early Catholic Church and even before it split off into the Orthodox and stuff, that was something they were just kind of always about, is just trying to really, you know, sell this religion any way they could. I don't know, it's one of those weird things. So I guess I'm surprised to find that it's directly tied to Saturn. I just kind of knew the Romans had like that, you know, winter solstice kind of holiday. That's what most of these things tend to be about. Is just a lot of things kind of go back to early people figuring out how the sun works, I guess. And just connecting how it all kind of comes together, and so that's why you get like a lot of early holidays and stuff. There's a pretty strong theory that or a lot of the Jesus stories, the stories that feel very similar to Jesus, with like the died on a cross, resurrected 3 days later, that's a really common myth, and a lot of it has to do with its roots in the quote-unquote death and rebirth of the sun, and that it dies, it stays at its lowest point, and it stays almost imperceptibly as low using ancient methods for 3 days, and then it starts to return. So I don't know, it's one of those, it's very, very interesting, but what in particular is unique about Saturn in that regard then?
Well, a lot of it does come to that Saturn was seen as, his power was creation and destruction. Yada yada yada, Hakai joke, insert. But his whole thing wasn't necessarily just having great power, although he certainly did. He was one of the only agricultural gods to be able to use lightning bolts, which is a very unique thing for that thing. Normally it is just the warrior gods, not the people who actually grow and create life at the same time. And Saturn was kind of seen as the booker of tradition, the person who makes destruction by not just destroying objects, but by destroying trends, by destroying societal expectations. So much so that the holiday would have a whole idea of, all right, role reversals would happen. It would be. This is where you kind of get the idea of, obviously, celebration has been a thing since humans existed and learned how to get high off mushrooms. But this kind of also was known for, like, everyone's drinking and eating a lot and going maybe a bit overboard than they normally would have, but all in the same celebration of trying to reclaim this feeling of being free from the shackles of where you are now and going back to when things were better, to the point where a lot of the ideas of Saturn would be tied into, okay, he was once the top guy, he was once around and now he's gone, but when his holiday comes around, it's reliving the time when he was still around. So it's like a nostalgic worship, which I think is very interesting.
Yeah, no, I can totally see that. So Saturn is still Zeus's father in Roman myth. Okay. It's really or Jupiter, I guess, if we're using Roman names. Shit always confused me because, like, the planets are, of course, named for the Roman gods as they discovered them. But, like, you grow up as a kid and it seems like Greek myth got more popular because I guess it's just more the original source. And so the planets are the names first. The names for the planets are just the names first before you think of the gods. That's weird association. Anyway, I had a point. Yes, okay. So you got Saturn, who's the father of Jupiter, Kronos, the father of Zeus, and it's weird to me because he's got, like, the same origin, and I find this interesting because you'll see this in a lot of creation myths, where they all seem to, like, they kind of start and then they stop for a second, restart. So, like, Kronos' origin is almost identical to Zeus's in a number of ways, which is just weird. That his whole thing, like, it's got some poeticness that he perpetuates the same thing his father did. But I don't know, there's something that's always kind of stood out as weird to me because that would seem like odd, but it's actually not. A lot of creation myths have that same kind of feel where they give you the start of everything and then they seem to do it all over. The Bible has that. There's, like, two creation origins back to back and they end up contradicting each other. It's weird.
Mm-hmm. And I guess that just basically comes down to different cultures and different figures of government being able to use those traditions to very strategically change certain things.
Mm-hmm.
Like another extra bit, just because I'm making sure I've got some notes up here as well. A double reason why it was changed to the 25th December specifically is that's the birthday of Sol. And they Julius Caesar thought it might be easier to convert people who were from Christianity if they had it celebrate on the same day, which is like a reverse of what the Christians did to the Norse. So this is all tying back.
That's funny.
Crazy. It's crazy how everything kind of does link back to Odin in the end, even down to Saturn and Odin being listed as the two, I guess, key visual inspirations for the depiction of Father Time, especially the idea of being hooded, which was a very unique thing among gods because for when people who would pray, you would neither wear a veil when you're in the presence of a god, except in certain expectations where the god themselves had a veil, so you would go unveiled to a sacrifice or something, right? So Odin and Saturn are one of the key examples of gods who hide certain features about themselves while also being wise and knowing certain truths, which I think, again, is weird that you tie this into the holidays and Christmas, because we still have Santa Claus. He's very open, but you gotta admit, he's hiding a lot of his face. If you break it down, he's just got like a window of nose and eyes.
I don't know if I'd entirely agree with that.
I mean, big bushy beard and the hat, so you don't get to see. It's more so than, say, other holiday icons. Would you at least agree with that? Like, no one else seems to have that much thing going on around the head area.
I guess. I mean, to be fair, you don't get to see the Easter Bunny, you know? But I guess you're right. I don't know. It's interesting to see how like these traditions kind of get carried over within a society. But I guess we should probably transition now and start talking more about Saturn himself. So the thing that's always gotten me, and forgive me if I just keep going back to the Greek names, it's just easier for me because that's how
it's the same. Yeah, it's the same thing. No worries. Yeah. Everyone in the below, just feel free to put in timestamps with translations for the different. Every time I say Saturn, put Kronos, and every time Ian says Kronos, put Saturn.
Yeah. So I don't know. The Titans were always just such a weird idea to me. I was kind of getting at that earlier. Where it's like we have, is it Uranus? I think it's Uranus. Is the sky, and Gaia is the Earth, and they have children together, and that's the Titans. And then Uranus starts eating his children or some shit. I can't remember exactly what it is. He starts oppressing his children, and so Kronos makes a knife and castrates his father, and then takes his sister as queen and starts having children, and that's the gods, and he starts eating them and until Zeus is hidden away, and then Zeus kills his father and frees the other gods, and so it just keeps going. And it's like, man, why is it the exact same thing? What I find interesting about that whole story there is it feels very much like that. But why? But why? But why? But what came first? But what came first? So it's like, okay, we worship the Greek, because I don't think there's any record of anyone ever worshiping the Titans. Like it seems fairly evident the Titans are created in retrospect to the gods. You know? I feel like that's very, very apparent that Zeus and company seem very much so to be worshipped and to exist well before things like the Titans are created. And I think it comes down to that idea of just... It's so hard to pin down with the ideas of oral tradition and stuff, but it would seem almost apparent that no one ever worshipped the Titans, but they were created to provide exposition about the gods. But in doing so, then you have to wonder, okay, well, what created them? And so then you go back a step, and then the inevitable question is, all right, well, then what created Uranus and Gaia? But if you just say that Uranus is the sky, the night, and Gaia is the earth, and that maybe gets to a point where you can't, especially back then, you can't imagine that anything else could be before those two things.
I guess mostly it comes back to, again, the common interpretation I always see is it's, at least in Kronos' case, is meant to be the idea of generations, right? Eating the children is to create more children, and it's a cycle. It's not something that just gets done with, and then Zeus again killing the father, and it is that thing of fathers and sons, and things will always repeat themselves. So I think that is maybe kind of, again, tying into every year passes and there's a rebirth, but there's also a death, and then things start and getting new. It's all tied into that. But you're very right in pointing out that there are a lot of strange and curious ideas of why people would adopt certain things that are clearly not meant to be as intended, as important as others. That's why I think Saturn is very unique, because there are certainly many studies and interesting kind of theories that do lead people to come to the conclusion that maybe Saturn was around before Kronos. Like certain dates don't match up, certain attributes for Kronos are found in places where Saturn was around long before his name was mentioned, and then it maybe seems that this was the one that the Romans instead attributed their patron deity onto a Titan. But at the same time, part of Saturn's whole gimmick, part of why he's very unique, is he's one of the only main gods who is an immigrant. And it goes back to his whole thing of debunking the status quo, of changing things. He's not even from here. He brings a new way of doing things. He brings a new way and interpretations of how to do different things, and renewal, constant renewal to a different time that you've never seen before. That, I feel like, might be something that they kept, and then they just, because they were already in the two cultures already so commercing through trade and so and so and so and so, that there's a crossover and there's some different interpretations through just like translation. Like, all right, like sometimes the gods' names would just be changed just for translation, not necessarily for especially once you get into international kind of concerns. So that, I feel like, might be where Kronos, being a much minor figure in Greek mythology, gets kind of boosted up through association with Saturn, which I can't really think happens to any of the other, like, Roman to Greek translations.
Which I know that's interesting, because I know eventually the same thing happened with the Norse gods, where, like, they had a really hard time, for whatever reason, conceiving of different gods, so they had to just, like, they just kind of assumed, oh no, this is just our gods appearing to you, and you're just barbarians, so you're calling them the wrong things. And they had to, like, kind of figure it out, and so they're like, all right, tell us your stories. And it's like, okay, well, that sounds like something that Hermes would do. So your guy Odin, that's really just Hermes. He's just a trickster, and so he's convinced you, since you're barbarians and you have no fucking culture, that he's the king of the gods. But no, it's actually Zeus. That's why Thor looks so bad in yours, because he's the god of thunder, and that's obviously Zeus. So he's just trying to make Thor look bad, or Zeus look bad. Shit like that, you know. You're probably right. You're probably very right that Saturn has his own tradition and stuff, because of course, you know, the old turn of phrase is, captive Greece held Rome captive. That Greece's culture was so strong, was so overwhelming, was so ingrained, and was so attractive that the Romans just ate that shit up. Even after they conquered Greece, they were just obsessed with Greek ideas, and so they started to model themselves off of the Greeks in a number of ways. But of course, they had their own culture first. They had their own identity first. You know, they were at one point subjects of the Etruscan Empire, but that, like, eventually got, you know, consumed and conquered by and faded into the Roman Empire, and so Greek myth is one of the Greek culture is one of those things that's really surprising that it stuck around as hard as it did, because just Rome just fell in love with it. But yeah, you're probably right in that idea that Saturn is kind of like one of the original, like, staple gods of the early Roman people, and in their attempt to just kind of, you know, slap Greek myth onto their own culture, they probably just, you know, added Saturn's, like, wheelhouse more to Kronos himself. That's an interesting idea. I hadn't really thought of it in that way.
What do you think about, because this is something I'm kind of curious, because I think it directly relates to what kind of, if we're going to go with character, what kind of character this represents when these people acted upon this. one of the biggest things about Saturnalia or proto-Christmas or bootleg Christmas or whatever you want to call it, the relation it has, is slaves were allowed to have banquets that would normally only be given to their masters, and they were allowed to critique and talk back to their masters without threat of punishment, and it was called December Liberty.
I mean, it's one of those things when I don't really know what to think of that. You know, it's so weird. I don't want to really get into a whole conversation about slavery because it's not connected enough to your point. But I think to the idea of like the holiday tradition and stuff, I think that it makes sense because there's that idea of this time of year you're supposed to be warmer, you're supposed to be kinder, things are supposed to be just nicer. And so the chance that like for the slave to actually say what they think without fear of repercussion, for the slave to actually be empowered and treated with grace and kindness, that's really interesting. And I don't know, it's kind of as interesting as it is, it's kind of to the decadence of the Roman Empire, where it's like we have a day where we give our slaves the greatest gifts. You know, there's something to that's kind of fucked up in its own right, as pleasant as it might sound if you were a slave? Question mark. I mean, like, I guess you say that, I'm just like, man, I'd love to have that with my boss. That'd be great.
I feel like that's one of those traditions that I feel like does, obviously not in practice, but I feel like in spirit that's something we've kept. Mm-hmm. The idea of this time not just being a time for celebration and goodwill, but of beyond the norm of what's seen as goodwill. And obviously allowing your slaves a banquet for like a week. Yay, great. They still got to be slaves for the other days of the year. Like, fuck you. But it's still, if you put yourself into that world, where that is the world you do, that's got to feel such a different, I can't ever imagine how that would feel to have such a dramatic role reversal. Like, that's like nothing we could ever have today, to have that level of from nothing to, for a few days, you get a taste of what you're missing. Like, it's almost cruel, right? Because then you got to go back to it. I feel like that's one of the interesting things about Christmas that we've kept in the holidays. And even like you get in like cheesy Christmas movies, it is all about like someone who's down on their luck getting a chance to enjoy something they normally wouldn't, or someone who's had a recent loss getting to forget about it and enjoy themselves, and that kind of spirit empowering all, while at the same time there is always kind of a bit of sweetness to Christmas. And I think Saturn, and maybe moving a little bit closer to New Year's, the idea of time itself as the New Year's traditions, because it is still intently tied to the holidays. It is intently tied to this time of year. There is the reason why they have a scythe, and it is also kind of connected to death in some ways. At the same time, it's connected to birth. You get old man and the baby. Like, there is a bit of sweetness to death, but it doesn't mean you can't enjoy it. At the same time, you know it's always going to come again the next year. So maybe I feel like that particular tradition interests me so much because it's the one thing outside of the gifts and the food that really kind of connects me the most to, okay, the holiday seasons as a holiday of time, which I don't think there's inherently, they all are related to certain periods of time, but never time as an ethereal concept, if that makes any sense.
No, I think you're definitely onto something. You want to go ahead and transition and talk about just like things that have portrayed Saturn or Kronos?
I mean, sure.
Okay. Because I was really racking my brain trying to think of things, because he's often such like a footnote character in most things. The only thing that like gave him any real screen time that I've ever come across was the God of War games.
That's where I was gonna go to.
Yeah, because the first game he just gets like a mention, and then he's more of like a cool concept background thing as the god carrying the Temple of Pandora on his back as he crawls through the desert. But then as like you go on to the second game and you interact with him briefly, where he gives you some extra power, and then that's probably the briefest interaction. But then the third game, he's a boss fight.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like insane, the level of skill and or level of scale rather that they give you in that battle. It's really, really interesting. So yeah, that's the biggest thing I could think of with portrayal of Kronos. I don't think he gets much of a character outside of just, yep, my son enslaved me, and so now I'm doing this. Really waiting for my banquet day, I guess.
Especially because you've got the added connotation there that isn't really explored with too much, but it's Kratos fighting his grandfather.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
Which is, again, it's probably something they didn't want to do just for the reveal had already happened, but like you want to save all that dramatic tension with the actual father, right? So I understand why, especially with the tone of God of War 3 is very different than like the latest God of War. But still, there is something to, if you do want to kind of compare them to the protagonist of Kratos, he literally is chained on the floor with his back because and wants revenge. But like, if you're ever gonna have a metaphor for what Kratos' fucking deal is, like a giant weight on his back holding his potential down as he just gets angrier for it. I mean,
yeah, that's like one of those things that's almost brilliant, but I honestly don't think the writers thought of that.
I know, man, but you've got to. Definitely the author, I think, applies very heavily with the God of War series sometimes, and I think they know that because then in later games they mention it as like, oh, we didn't know this was such a great idea, but we're so glad we did it because now we know how to make it really work. So I feel like I'm able to give them that because it is. First of all, it's a really kick-ass boss fight to have a Titan. Obviously, Greek depictions have varied now and again, but when you really get a sense of the scale of what a Titan is, it is something to behold. And I like the idea of, similar to Norse mythology, where Odin bedded a giant to have Thor. Because it kind of explains where the hero gets the power from. It's like these giants, these non-gods, but who are physically more powerful than any god. The idea that the gods themselves came from these giant behemoth embodiments of strength and nature is really interesting. So being able to take one down is just cool as a boss fight, albeit it's not so much a character piece. When you make him that kind of literal mountain to overcome, I can understand why making him a fully three-dimensional character is pretty low on the priority at that point.
Oh, totally. The only other thing I could think of that I really, really liked with Kronos was you're gonna kill me for it. Azarella's Wonder Woman run. Yeah,
go into it.
It's got literally one of the coolest moments for Kronos because Azarello did a really, really good Hades. His writing for Hades, I usually hate when Hades is like, the Disney Hercules villain kind of role. I like when Hades is just kind of, he's just there. He's just kind of waiting. He's got his schemes and stuff too, but he's far from the worst guy among the Greek gods. But he's got like a dark edge to him, certainly. So you got Hades in that run, and eventually you just see him feeding his father in the underworld, and his father's just like, chained to a wall, no, they don't feed him. My bad. I fucked it up. He's eating in front of his father, and his father's chained to a wall, and he's like this just anemic giant. It looks like just you can see the bones through the skin and stuff, because if you're immortal, you can't starve to death, but you can also never be fed again. And so Hades just sitting there eating in front of him, talking, and then you see that his stomach's literally been cut open. There's just a gaping hole where his stomach is. And that's like really, really like super fucked. And then the story continues on, and you got the firstborn killing all the gods, and Hades dies, and the minions of the firstborn are feeding Hades to Kronos, and he hasn't eaten in thousands of years, and he's just screaming, "Feed me!" And you just see them like, like you see like the pieces of Hades like coming through the hole in Kronos' stomach, and they're trying to like force it back in and feed him the pieces that have fallen out. It's just like such a super fucked image, but I really like just how like I can see that just as an actual Greek thing that just feels like incredibly Greek to me.
It's that ultimate comeuppance.
Yes.
It's the worst fate imaginable. Exactly
that. And I believe Hades is even like half alive still while he's being fed to his father. So it's absolutely insane the shit that they do with Kronos and that. But it's fucking cool as shit. The Azarella run had its moments.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that at least, because that does sound kind of cool. But at the same time, it also sounds very indicative of the rest of that run's approach to shit. Always the darkest way possible. I think for the Greek gods themselves it works, but you try to apply it to every other aspect of Wonder Woman's mythology and it kind of gets a little dicey. But no, I think that's interesting, and it kind of maybe a little disappointing is, although he is very tied closely to Kronos, Saturn's got his own shit going on, and no one's touched it, at least into my recollection. And like, I 100% want to see Wonder Woman do more with like Roman gods, just to see like different mythologies. Because she's battled for now and again. She's done other things with like mythologies. Like Egyptian stuff has been there now and again, but the Roman stuff you think would be a go-to thing, and I'm sure now and again, but there is no DC Universe equivalent of Saturn. It's just a DC Kronos, and I think you could make them a legitimately different character, or how DC likes to do with their gods sometimes, different aspects of the same source, like how Darkseid has different avatars and such. I feel like maybe Saturn being just the idea of the immigrant god that brings a great change speaks so much to Wonder Woman and Superman. I think there's a story there.
I could totally see that. You'll have to forgive me. What about Saturn makes him an immigrant? I don't think I've heard that part of the character's history.
It is just one of the things that's mentioned, as he came from a time long before us and is seen as someone who upset the status quo, became a great leader, a pantheon kind of owner, and then disappeared. And every holiday he's chained up, and then they release him on. They would have statues of Saturn where his feet were tied in wool, and then on the 25th or close to that time, they would untie the statues. And that would be seen as like the release of Saturn. And again, if anyone down below knows any specific things, or could correct me if I'm talking a load of boohacky, please do. But I have no specific things for why it is. I just know from when I did a lot of research for this and just in my own things, it came up constantly that Saturn was special because he was an immigrant, and the status quo changing and all of this was different. He represented the time of change.
I mean, I think you could definitely make that work with DC Kronos and stuff. Is just like you could do the Titans weren't monsters. That's just what the gods said of us, kind of story. I think that could definitely work.
And it's just, again, comics, you can do anything you want. You can retcon how a character's in one appearance. They do it all the time. And with gods, I feel like that's almost makes them more impactful, because then they become like legends then. I feel like the continuity fubbles of comics always help me with like Darkseid and such like that, because or even Zeus, because it makes me feel like, yeah, they are just different reflections of this same image that we're only seeing one three-dimensional part of this six-dimensional idea.
Alrighty. I don't know if we really can do recommendations for Saturn.
Sadly.
Yeah.
Just, read up on it.
Yeah, in general. Alrighty. Oh, is it still another character discussion next week? It's another character discussion next week, isn't it? Fuck me and the horse I rode in on, dude. Ugh. Because this goes up on the 17th. Oh, and I've got one on Christmas fucking Eve that I've got to post. Shit, it's got to be a good one.
It's gotta be the bomb.
I know. What the fuck do I talk about? What? There are no... Alright, fuck it. I'm gonna go Vegas shit again because I can't talk about any one, but we can talk about the trope of it. So we're gonna talk about fucking Frosties. Or living snow people. There. We're doing that.
Ian, once again, divulging an entire layered great group of people with individual characters to just a whole race.
That's what we need. We need like a Christmas D&D campaign where you get to like choose your class. You can be like a workshop elf or a snow person.
I'd be down for that. So long as the workshop elves only are able to use what they can craft, and it has to be a toy. Like the definition of their skill set is they're allowed to craft any weapon, but you have to justify it to be a toy version. So all their bows and arrows have to be like child friendly. You have to make it work.
Yeah, so like the typical D&D player is like, all right, I'm gonna make a bow and arrow, okay, but it can only shoot like rubber arrows or something. And then like the Chad plays like, I'm gonna make fucking jacks. Oh shit! I spread them across the battlefield faster than the eye can see.
I throw grenades. You're not allowed to make grenades, you fool. They're made of Lego. Just step on one and says, "Oh, what the fuck?" 10,000 damage.
Oh shit! Alrighty, that's a good one. I'm gonna just send that to Will. Alright, everyone, thanks very much for watching. Until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
And I'm the champion of the oppressed.
And we are your geeky gentlemen, and we will be discussing things.
Ho, 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 ho! Merry Christmas!